well, Jacob is in Padan Aram, about 450, 500 miles north of the Promised Land, still living with his uncle Laban, where he's been working for his two daughters. He's now married to them and has 11 children. So that's where we're picking up here in Genesis 30. We're going to start in verse 25. But before we do, I just want to encourage you with Jacob. When I read through Jacob and I think of the testimony he acquired, I love reading about Jacob because there's a lot of things I can really relate to with Jacob. Jacob is kind of, a lot of ways to me, he feels a lot like the Peter of the Old Testament. It's like he had a lot of faith and he had a lot of struggles. And we get to see quite a bit of both. And so I just want to encourage you as we go through these things to pull the lessons, the things God was teaching him. Let's learn from his strengths. Let's learn from his weaknesses. And the things that the Lord was teaching him that we can benefit in our lives and our walks with the Lord. Amen? So let's begin. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children from whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service which I have done for you." And Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Then he said, "Name me your wages, and I will give it." So Jacob said to him, "You know how I have served you, and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now when shall I also provide for my own house?" So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything, if you'll do this thing for me. I'll again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all the flocks today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come. When the subject of my wages comes before you, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me." And Laban said, "Oh, that it were according to your word." So he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hand of his sons. Then he put a 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flock. All right, Jacob's now been here for about 14 years, serving Laban for his two daughters, 7 years for each. He has 2 wives, 2 concubines, and his agreement with Laban was up. His contract was over. And so he says, "Hey, let me go. I've paid in full for my wives. I've served you well." And so he's asking to be released. And verse 27, Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Laban's flock exploded under Jacob. It's not that he had a gradual increase or a pretty good increase. It is literally from the Hebrews that it exploded. And so his wealth just flourished under Jacob. Not only was Jacob a hard worker, as we can see from the text as we keep going, but he had also been given divine favor. Laban was experiencing the Abrahamic covenant. I will bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. And he was experiencing the blessing. He had shown good favor to Jacob, and now he was experiencing a lot of favor that was divine favor. Now, he says that he learned by experience that he was blessed, that the Lord had blessed him. And this at first, in the English, it sounds like Laban is giving credit to God. Like, because your God's blessed you. But really what it's saying is that he learned by divination. That he learned by sorcery, in a sense, is what we call it. That the God of Jacob was the reason that he was blessed. And so this isn't actually a great credit here to Laban. We find that his idolatry ran pretty deep. So he knew God, and he knew that he was blessed because of the God of Jacob. And he even uses the name here for the one true God, but he does not turn to him. And so he can see him, and he can see the favor, and he can see the blessings, but he stays bowing down to his idols. And I think what a sad reality for so many people. They actually do know God's real. They know about him, but they want to serve their own ways. They want to serve their own idols, the things that they think will give them pleasure. But Laban here, he says to Jacob, name me your wages. Last time, again, this worked out really well for Laban. He got 7 years for each daughter, partially, of course, because of a trick. He was only supposed to get 7. But then Jacob makes this presentation to him that makes him really happy again. All the speckled and spotted sheep and the brown ones among the lambs and the speckled and spotted among the goats. We can tell from Laban's response this was not very common. These were not the majority of the sheep or the goats, or of course Laban would have rejected this offer. But that he's so excited about the offer shows he didn't have a lot that were like that. And then he does something also that really favors himself. Laban does something, and that Jacob goes through and he divides out the speckled and the spot and the streaked, and he gets them out. But then Laban takes all that part of his sheep and he puts them 3 days away from the ones that Jacob's caring for. And so now all he's got is like a bunch of white sheep to mate with each other. He doesn't have any of the speckled or spotted to mate with each other. And so this would seem that Laban was doing things now for his own benefit. He's being greedy. He's taking advantage of the offer. Okay, you made the deal, but we didn't set any other conditions. And so he's favoring himself in the deal, making it very difficult or unlikely for Jacob to acquire a vast amount of livestock. Verse 37. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. It's debated by different scholars when you get to this section if Jacob knew something about breeding livestock to produce these different types of speckled and spotted, or if he was just following a superstition of the time, of that this is how it works. We do know that people can do things with breeding to manipulate the fur colors and mice and different things. So maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I'm really personally surprised it's not a very settled thing in our time. You'd think somebody would have tried it. But it doesn't really matter with the science, because we know in the next chapter it's God that caused them all to be speckled, spotted, and streaked. He takes credit. He tells Jacob that was from him. And so even if Jacob was planning and he's trying to get them to become speckled and spotted, the real reason they came out in such vast amounts of speckled and spotted is because God was giving them to Jacob. And he's taking them, of course, from Laban. During this time is about 6 years that he stays in Padan Aram before he goes back to the promised land. And during this time, Jacob's wealth begins to explode. He's still not wealthy. All he has is his wives and his children. But during this 6 years, he acquires a massive amount of livestock, servants and animals and different things that are under his care. And it's the same word again that we see in the Hebrew. It's not like of a gradual or just a good, but an explosion that happens within his livestock. So he has, again, divine favor on the things that he's doing. And that's verse 43 says that, thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So God here blesses Jacob far beyond normal means. Chapter 31. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all this wealth. And Jacob saw that the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, and that is not favorable toward me as before. But the God of my father has been with me, and you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said, thus the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said, thus the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here I am. He said, lift your eyes now and see all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, go out of this land and return to the land of your family. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us, and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. So as God shifts this blessing away from Laban and continues to bless Jacob, jealousy kicks in for Laban and his sons. Laban was changing Jacob's wages all the time, 10 times in 6 years. We don't know if it was every few months or if it was a year or two it stayed steady or whatever. We're not sure. But either way, 10 times in 6 years is obviously a lot of change. We see, again, the reverse side of the Abrahamic covenant. Right? If Laban would have continued to bless Jacob, he actually would have continued to be blessed. But because he's now trying to take advantage of Jacob, and he's trying to hurt Jacob and take care of himself, now he's going to be cursed, and he's losing what he had. And so you see both sides of this Abrahamic covenant in full effect. And it's ironic how sin can often kill the thing you're looking for. And here is Laban wanting to be more wealthy, wanting to be of greater livestock, but his greed is killing it. And so be careful. Greed hurts the one being greedy. Verse 4, the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. Man, what a neat promise. I love that God gives clarity, but he gives this promise. He tells him it's time to head home. But as he's supposed to go home, he says, I will be with you. I mean, I read those statements at different places in the Bible, and when I read them, I just think, thank you, God. I love those statements. And, you know, it's an important thing for us when God sends you somewhere that you remember that he's with you. That doesn't guarantee that everything's going to go great. He was with Joseph when he got sold as a slave by his brothers. Doesn't mean everything's going to go great or how you want, right? Overall, we would say that Joseph had an amazing life, an incredible testimony, but we might not want to live it, right? But as we look at these things, there's this incredible promise that God gives to Jacob. I will be with you, just like Christ has promised to us, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And thank you, Lord, for that promise. Verse 17, then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, and that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days, a 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. Well, again, this journey from where he was heading is about 500 miles. 500 miles, but then around is like north of where they're heading back to the land of Canaan, 450, 500 miles. Now, these mountains where they meet at Gilead, these are about 350 miles roughly south. So this has been 10 days. He's traveling with a massive amount of livestock, children's family. To say that he's fleeing and that he's traveling 30 miles a day with everybody, yeah, he's booking it. He's running. So he's very obviously concerned with the ideas of what would Laban do if he knew he was trying to leave. It's not wrong for him to leave. The cattle are his. He earned them. He worked for them. The wives are his. The children are his. He is okay to leave. Most certainly what he's thinking is, I need to get within the reach of my father, who is also very wealthy and very powerful, to scare off Laban so that he won't be brave enough to fight. And if he does, he'll have to hopefully fight my father. That's, I think, the idea of what he's doing. So he's trying to get down there, and he's moving quick. I think this was one of the most stressful times in Jacob's life. You know, we can sometimes read this story, and we can forget about all the emotions and the different things. We can forget that for these 10 days, that was probably continually on Jacob's mind is, how far back is Laban? Is he going to catch me? When he catches me, what will happen? Will he take everyone? Will he kill me? Will I be forced to return? Do I have to go back up there to work? What's going to happen? Will God deliver us? And so he's got all these thoughts going on. And we can read through the story. There are several areas we'll see. Jacob is very stressed through all these things. And so when you read about Jacob, there's no way that these thoughts are not going through his head, that he's not concerned or worried about it. If he wasn't worried about it, if he had cattle and young sheep and young kids and everything, remember his kids, the oldest one's what, 14, 13? So he's got a young family. Moving this fast shows his concern. He wouldn't push everybody and everything this hard if he wasn't greatly concerned. But there's also an important part for us to understand, that God had already told him, I will be with you. And I think that's an important lesson for us, because we also at times can be filled with stress, filled with anxiety and worry. And we can forget the promise of God that I am with you. How many times have you been fearful or anxious? But when has God ever abandoned you? It's only when we set our minds on the trial or the deceit or the lies of the enemy that we're given over to this state. God constantly reminds his people not to operate in a spirit of fear. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. What's the reason he shouldn't be afraid? The Lord is with you wherever you go. What did Jesus say? And lo, I am with you even to the end of the age. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. Paul here, writing to young Timothy, says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. Often we can go to bed. I'm guilty of this, all right? So as I am preaching on this, I am convicted of this. I can't count the amount of hours I have lost sleep at night with the what ifs in my head. I've had fights with people. I've had insecurities. I've had doubts. And a lot of them of things that never even manifested. But I lost hours of sleep. I lost hours of thought. I carried a lot of weight, a lot of stress. Well, why? Because my eyes were fixed on the concern, on the what if. And they weren't fixed on the one who was with me. They were not fixed on God. During this time, of course, Rachel stole her father's gods, the little house idols. This was obviously foolish that she did this. It's funny when you step back and look at Laban here with his molded images, that he's calling these gods, but he needs to protect them from theft. It's like, wow, you got some powerful gods. Your daughter carried them off. But why did she do this? Well, it could be she wanted to worship them. It could be it. I don't think that's probably the reason, but that could be. It seemed more likely she wanted them because they would have given her the rights to the inheritance. That with the family idols would have gone the property rights. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, in his commentary, says the following. He says, the Code of Hammurabi states that whoever has the household gods owns the property. So she was probably taking them, thinking, someday I will have the right to the family inheritance. That's probably what she was doing. But either way, it was very foolish, and it almost cost her her life. And so she could have ended up dying from that. But let's keep reading. Verse 26. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. And now you have surely gone, because you greatly longed for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid. For I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. But with whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of a woman is with me. And he searched, but did not find the household idols. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks. And you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. Very friendly conversation going on here. Why you gotta be careful who you pick for in-laws. Laban rebukes Jacob for leaving in the way that he did. He told him what he did was foolish. But God appeared to Laban and warned him to be very careful with Jacob. And again, I want to remind you of the promise. What did God tell him? I will be with you. Laban asked, why did you take my idols? And Jacob said, whoever took them, do not let them live. You know, sometimes people in the Bible, they spoke too quick. And it's an important lesson that we should learn. It's a small detail. He's not the only guy in the Bible that does it, but sometimes they utter things too quick. And here he is, so certain nobody in his house took him. He's like, whoever finds him, kill him. Man, was he sure thankful that he didn't find him. Would have he killed his own daughter or not? I don't know. But would have he regretted that he had put that in his hands? He would have. He would have. So be careful what you say. Think before you respond. But Laban searches for his idols and, of course, is unable to find them, though Rachel did steal them. And of course, she's hiding them. Whether it was truly or not true that it was that time of the month for her, we don't know. But she barely made it out of there. And an important thing of, whether she was stealing those things for trying to steal the inheritance, whether she was stealing those things because she wanted to worship him, either way, it was foolish. It was foolish. She shouldn't have done it. She should have let those things be. We don't need to bring another gods in, whether it's for an inheritance or for any other reason. With sin, with deceit, comes pain, comes regret, comes mistakes. So Jacob here, after this, of course, then he rebukes Laban. And he tells him why he left. And that he was afraid. And that Laban had demonstrated to him bad character. Laban said this to him. He said, "Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing." It sounds actually like a pretty healthy rebuke. Like when you hear his request of his things that he's saying, it sounds like Laban actually has some pretty good intent. But then you hear Jacob's response. "Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." I think it seems it would have been better for Jacob to be forthright. He knew God was with him. It seems it would have been better for him to trust God and not sneak away, but to tell Laban he was leaving. But at the same time, it's easy to judge a man from the contents of the pages and not the pressures of the situations of reality. And so the moments and those things would be very difficult. We obviously can see if he would have told him, it still would have taken an act of God for him to let him go. Laban was very greedy, and he saw Jacob's possessions, including his daughters, his children, all that he owned, still as his own. It wasn't true, but that's how he saw it. And we know that from verse 43. Let's read it. "And Laban answered and said to Jacob, 'These daughters are my daughters. These children are my children. And this flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me.'" Laban had warned Jacob earlier that it was within his power to do him great harm. And most likely there was great harm intended on Laban's part. Because we know he's a greedy man. And he sees all these things as his. He's misjudging the situation. He's ignoring everything that Jacob worked for. "These are my daughters." Well, they were. You gave them away or sold them to this man. "These are my flocks." Actually, those flocks were never yours. As soon as they were born, they were Jacob's wages. It is like a company owner looking at his employees' houses and saying, "That's my house. I bought that." No, you didn't. No, that's your employee's house. That's not your house. And so we see here this greed that was clearly in Laban, that his heart was not right. And it's heartbreaking when you see the division that this can cause, the difficulties this can cause. Guard your hearts against greed. Laban loved himself, and it came back to bite him. So we should also learn, don't be like Laban. You could see God's favor, but you're living for yourself. That's what Laban was. He could see God working, but he is still consumed in living for self. At last, he sees he's unable to come against Jacob with success because God warned him. So they make a covenant, a peace treaty. Verse 45, "So Jacob took a stone and set up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, 'Gather stones.' And they took stones, and they made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, 'This heap is a witness between you and me this day.' Therefore its name was called Gilead. Also Mizpah, because he said, 'May the Lord watch between you and me, when we are absent from one another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me.' Then Laban said to Jacob, 'Here is the heap, and here is the pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us." And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Well, at last now he's finally at peace with Laban, and they're able to come to a treaty with a promise not to harm each other. In verse 54 it says, Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. You know, we can often cry out to God for help, but forget to thank him after. And so remember, as God answers your prayers, to return with praise and thanksgiving and worship. That's how we should respond to God. Chapter 32, where we'll jump into next, becomes Jacob's next hurdle. This isn't the end of the stress for him on this trip. This is only the halfway point. So he's got through this one hurdle. And because of the fear of God and the fear of Isaac, Laban lets him go. But as we get to chapter 32, now his focus will turn to his brother Esau, reuniting with him. So let's pick it up in verse 1. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim, meaning the place of two camps, God's and Jacob's. That's the two he's talking about, God's camp and Jacob's camp. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and herds and camels into two companies. And he said, "If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape." You know, it opens up here that the angels of God met him. Jacob had his spiritual eyes open where he was able to see the angels that were with him, probably referring to angels that God dispatched to watch over him on this journey. Yet in verse 7, Jacob is greatly afraid and distressed. Isn't it amazing what happens when our eyes get on the problem instead of on the Lord? I can't imagine the things that he just saw and that he's already filled with fear. And then as I say, I can't imagine that. I also recognize how the Lord can do an amazing thing in my life in the morning, and at night I can't sleep because I can't surrender something to him. And so again, I can relate so much with Jacob. And he here begins to use two terms back and forth with his brother, calling Esau Lord and himself Esau's servant. The title Lord and servant could also be a clear suggestion that Jacob was saying he had no intention of trying to claim his birthright or the right of the firstborn. As Esau hears about it, he's coming to him with 400 men. This could have been for a few different reasons. The first one could have been, of course, to attack his brother, to get his vengeance that he had swore that he would give him for deceiving his dad and taking his blessing. So it could be that he's coming to attack him. It's been 20 years, and maybe he hasn't let it go. Esau could have dispatched them for Jacob's safety, to help bring his brother home. That's probably not the reason, but it could have been. We aren't given his motive. He could have done it as a precaution to see if his brother was coming for peace or to claim lordship over him. Oh, does he think he's going to come and now start telling me what to do, Mr. Head of Household? So it could have been for those different reasons. But no matter what Esau's reasons were, it scared Jacob really bad. Jacob was terrified at the sound of that. 400 men are coming with him. I wonder how many times we sit in the company of mighty angels with God watching over us, and we're completely given over to a mindset of fear. he has the angels of God encamping with him, and he's terrified. Isn't that amazing? You know, God still dispatches angels today to watch over us. Again, that's not a guarantee we won't have problems. It doesn't mean we won't endure hardships. As we referenced earlier, God was watching over Joseph. He took him down to Egypt, and he watched over him through Potiphar's house. He watched over him through the prison, and he took him into Pharaoh's house. But through that all, he allowed his brothers to steal from him. He allowed him to go into a house where the wife was obsessed with trying to sleep with him, and she makes false accusations that lands him in prison. And in all those things, he just remains faithful. He's keeping his eyes on the Lord. How many of us would be overcome at any one of those circumstances, so focused on the problem that we'd be destroyed? But Joseph's a great example. I'm sure he had hardships. I'm sure he had battles, but he keeps his eyes on the Lord through it all. Where Jacob is greatly stressed, greatly concerned about what will happen. Verse 9. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Again, confirming for us that he was sent from his father with nothing. In verse 11, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Well, we see again here that God has clearly blessed Jacob far beyond normal means. And Jacob had learned to pray. And you know, we could pick this prayer apart in a lot of ways, but I'll say one thing I love about Jacob and his prayers, it's honest. He's pouring his heart out to the Lord. I'm afraid, God. I'm really afraid. I'm afraid that me and my family will die. That's what he's saying. But also in his prayer, he reminds God and himself of his promises and God's direction. And Jacob's faith was tested. But he would see also that God is faithful. Now, Jacob knows he's imperfect. Jacob knows he's not worthy of God's blessing. He said so. He said, I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. Jacob knew he was taking a step of faith when he was going back on this journey. He was concerned about Laban, and he was concerned about meeting again with his brother. And he said, I know, God, I'm not worthy of your mercies, but I also know you have made promises to me. You know, in the midst, as we can look and see his struggles, his insecurities, his fears, he also went. He had enough faith to get all his kids on the camels and get all his sheep, all his livestock, and he's in the middle of the journey. And so as much as on one part we can knock him with his insecurities and all his concerns, and he's taking his eyes off the angels. He's taking his eyes off of God and the promise, I will be with you. But he still had the faith to go, and he's still going as he's terrified. And you know what? I really think that's really great that he's still moving forward. And it's like Peter when he got out of the boat and he stepped on the water, but as soon as he gets his eyes on the storm, he begins to sink. But you know what? Peter's the only one of the 12 that walked on water. He had the faith and the courage to get out of the boat. And you know, Jacob here, he got the courage and the faith to get out of the boat, but he's letting God know, but my knees are shaking as I do it. And yeah, he should have complete rest. He should have complete confidence. But thank God that at least he had enough. And maybe he didn't have perfect faith, but he did have enough faith to take the journey. He did have enough faith. Not enough to sleep well at night, but enough to go. But there's another important lesson for us. What should we do when we're overcome with anxieties, with worries, with fears, with problems? Cry out to God and be honest. What are you afraid of? What are you worried about? What's weighing you down? And lay it there before him. Verse 13. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hands as a present for Esau, his brother, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 foals. Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass over before me, and put some distance between successive droves." And he commanded the first one, saying, "When Esau my brother meets you, and asks you, saying, 'To whom do you belong, and where are you going? Whose are these in front of you?' Then you shall say, 'They are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he also is behind us.' So he commanded the second, the third, and all who followed the droves, saying, 'In this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And also say, Behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. And afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me.' So the present went on before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp." Jacob has taken a very humble approach to his brother. He is filled with fear and anxiety. As he's worried, I'll also remind you, the angels are still with him. He's still got God with him. And we see here again a hint of the amount of wealth God gave him, because he's sending 580 livestock to Esau as a present. It's a pretty nice present he's given. And he spaces them out and has specific wording for his servants, intended to show both Jacob's humility and prosperity. And he's layering up these gifts, and it makes sense. He's doing it for effect on his brother, right? Here's the first gift, and another, and another, and another, and he's building up the gifts that he's giving to soften his brother's heart, to let him see, my intentions towards you are good. I'm not coming for war. I'm coming to dwell in peace. And we see that again within the verbiage that he uses. My lord Esau, his servant Jacob. Right? He's letting him know, I'm not coming. I do not desire to quarrel with you. And obviously by the gifts, we see some humility in him. He told each of his servants to tell them, they are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he also is behind us. Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. You know, Jacob took a very humble approach with his brother. He prepared for the worst, did what he could through prayer, and he created his best efforts for peace. He did all three. He was seeking the Lord. He was dividing his home into two camps, and he was seeking out peace. Again, he might have been afraid, but he was still going. I wonder how many people would have never left Padan Aram. How many people would have stayed just because they were afraid of Laban? Plus, if they get away from Laban, what about Esau? And even if God told them, like, yeah, but God, you'd have to explain to me how I would live through it, how I would get down there and still have my wives or kids. I don't think you want me to go down there. I think my wives would die, or my kids would die, or I might die. And a lot of people wouldn't go. A lot of people would be paralyzed by that fear. But Jacob is going. So he's imperfect, but at least he's obedient. And verse 22, he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Yabbo. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of that place Peniel, for I have seen the face of God God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Penuel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the muscle that shrank. All right, well, the children of Israel, I think, from what I understand, they do eat that now in our time. It says they don't eat it in that day. It's talking about the time back when it was written, time of Moses. But here Jacob is, he's alone on the river, on the side of the river, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. And he finds out that this man is God. It is the pre-incarnate Christ. That's who he is wrestling with. The only reason that God is allowing him to wrestle with him, of course God could have defeated him at any point, is God is allowing this struggle with Jacob and him. And so we see here Jacob is struggling with God, and I believe the lesson that he's learning here is to trust him. This wrestling match lasts all night and finally comes to a close when Jesus touches his hip socket and it goes out, and Jacob cries out for him to be blessed, recognizing his need. He realizes he's been defeated, but he asked to be blessed. And he is blessed. He is given a new name or a new identity. God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. He says, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Jacob had wrestled with Esau and Laban, and both times God delivers him. He also wrestled with God and came out blessed. What does that mean? You know, obviously this is something that happened, but I think in a sense, that I think we could say that we all wrestle with God to some degree. We have this struggle of trying to do things in our own strength, in our own wisdom. What we need to learn to do is stop identifying in the old man and start identifying in the new. To walk by faith and not by sight. David Guzik in his commentary says this: before Jacob could be delivered from the hand of his brother, he had to be delivered from his own self-will and self-reliance. Jacob, of course, means heel catcher, but Israel means God rules, or God fights, or struggle with God. But I think God rules is to me by favor. But I think they're all fitting. I think they're all correct. The name that he's given them, those who follow God, at times they struggle or wrestle with him. God fights for his children, and God rules in their lives, in our lives. So I believe this name change is a wonderful name. This is who you are now. Every single one of the potentials of that definition bring back still his name to identifying or correlating back to God. And how important is it that we see our identity in him? Let's continue on to chapter 33. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, and Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, who are these with you? So he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down. Afterward Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. Then Esau said, what do you mean by all this company which I met? And he said, these are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. Jacob went in front of this company. He went behind the gifts, but he went in front of his family, most likely thinking if his brother had vengeance, hopefully he would take it on himself and allow his family to live. But his family there comes behind him. Now remember, God told him through this all, as he's still worried and stuff, I will be with you. And we see God's favor and provision as he meets his brother. Jacob had so much stress and worry because of the fear of what if. What if? His humble approach worked, perhaps. Perhaps God guided him to it. But we also know there was an angel army with him to safeguard him either way. So these 400 men were of little concern because God was with Jacob. We can learn a lot about the power of humility and de-escalating a bad situation here. But Jacob also needed to learn to trust in God. The fear he experienced was not because of how God led him, but because of where he allowed his mind to wander. And his worries and fears were never realized. Again, how many of us have spent sleepless nights on things that never happened, on realities that never came to be? I am guilty of this. We should be wise, but we should not be given to fear. We should not be constantly given to the mind of what if, but a mind that is trusting in God. Jacob's gift and his humble approach was, of course, goodwill towards Esau, and was, of course, showing that he was not coming to fight. And let's finish up. I think we'll get at least through verse 11 here. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. And Jacob said, no, please, if I have now found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand. Inasmuch as I have received your face, seen your face as though I have seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. Please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. So he urged him, and he took it. Jacob's gift is partially an apology. His humility was recognition of his offense towards his brother. He did, of course, deceive his dad, and to get the family blessing, God would have given it to him. He didn't need to do the deception. And Esau's acceptance of the gift culturally symbolizes his forgiveness of Jacob. David Guzik, in his commentary, says, in the culture, one never accepted a gift from an enemy, only from a friend. To accept the gift was to accept the friendship. And so by the acceptance of Jacob's gift is the healing of the relationship between the brothers, the forgiving of past offenses. You know, we're just about through this section. I'm sorry we're a few minutes late, but let's just read through it real quick. Verse 12. Then Esau said, let us take our journey. Let us go, and I will go before you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure until I come to my Lord in Seir. And Esau said, now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, and Jacob journeyed to Sukkot. But built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of that place is called Sukkot. Then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. And he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected an altar there and called it El Elohi Israel. All right, well, with this final verse here, Jacob is finally back in the promised land. He finally completed his journey. It would seem he took a while there where he dwelt in Sukkot, just north of the promised land, but he finally makes it back into the promised land and buys some property. Esau, his brother, lived on the southern side of the promised land. And from what we have recorded here, actually, is Jacob never made it to Seir. Some think that's fulfilled in the Messianic kingdom. It may have been also that's just not recorded for us, or it could be both. But this journey represents another big change in Jacob's life. He left as one man, and he returned as another. And on the way up to Padan Aram, God broke Jacob. He was teaching him, and he revealed himself to him at Bethel. And when God brought him back to the promised land, he again changed Jacob. He left as Jacob. He returned as Israel. And God did a transformation, not just in the name, but in the man. His identity was shaken both times, but never for his destruction, but God's grace to bring him to maturity. So learn to love God's correction and his teaching. God has timing and seasons in life. They're not the same for everyone. Isaac never had to leave the promised land. Jacob had to go on a journey. Somebody's struggles are different than your struggles, but God will bring you through them, and he will grow you through them if you keep your eyes on him. What a neat God we have, how he grows us through different situations. What a neat God that he allows men, even who struggle with doubts and fear, to wrestle with him in their insecurities, in their schemings, in their plannings, and yet he transforms them into another man, one that can acquire a great testimony, so great that God even identifies as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And what an encouragement to us, because God can do the same work in you and me. And so what do we need to do? We need to learn to walk in faith. We should, of course, walk in faith even when the road is difficult. But if nothing else, we should learn from Jacob. Even when we struggle with insecurities, cast those insecurities before the Lord. Pray them over before the Lord and move forward in his leading anyway. Amen? Lord, I thank you for this time this morning. I pray, Father, for your blessing on this congregation. Lord, I pray, Father, that you would that continue to do, Lord, this transformational work in us. Lord, I thank you that in different seasons, sometimes difficult seasons, Lord, we're not alone. You are there with us, Lord. You have dispatched angels that watch over us. We thank you, Lord, that through this whole journey, Jacob was never alone. He may have felt afraid. He may have felt alone, but Lord, you are with him. Lord, I pray, Father, that through whatever trials or challenges may come, Lord, that you would also bring us to maturity in you through those trials. But that we would also trust in you, that we lay out every fear and every insecurity before you. And Lord, that we would learn to trust in you, and that you would establish us a new people in you. So Lord, we love you and we need you. In Jesus' name, amen.
From creation to the cross, there from the cross into eternity, your grace finds me. Yes, your